Welcome to the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge Podcast, where we talk everything training, nutrition, and lifestyle collectively. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge Podcast with myself, your host Alex Connor, and today I am joined by Rick Collins. Now, Rick Collins is the lawyer that the people go to in the fitness community when they have a legal question or a problem. He's a former competitive bodybuilder himself. He's based out of New York, but with a practice that spans the US and has even brought him abroad. He is counsel to the Pro League of Professional Bodybuilding, the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and represents many companies in the sports nutrition and dietary supplement market. He has many defended athletes in doping accusations and has represented, defended, or advised more clients involved in the possession or distribution of anabolic steroids and other performance-enhancing drugs than any other lawyer on the planet. If you're heavily involved in the fitness industry, definitely give him a follow on social media. And if you have a legal problem, you can definitely contact him. I will put all his details below. We had a very interesting conversation and there was definitely a lot of light shed on areas that I was unaware about. He's very entertaining, very dynamic. He has a multitude of passions and experience, some of which we cover in this episode. I know you're gonna enjoy this one. And just before we segue into that, thank you once again for all the support that we're getting. You can now download and listen to the Raw Knowledge Podcast on all your social media platforms. And be sure to share it around as well with those who you think will find it interesting, those like-minded people, as it helps the channel and the podcast grow, and we can reach more people and help spread the good word and raise the industry standard and create better knowledge and awareness. So thank you sincerely. I really appreciate it. All your support helps, and that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. If I can give back positively and help share my guests' knowledgeable experience, then that is job done. Okay, so without further ado, enjoy this latest conversation between myself and Rick Collins. All right, Rick, welcome to the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge Podcast. Thank you for making the time. I believe it's evening in New York, is that correct?
It is indeed. Thanks for having me on, Alex. Yes.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Now, Rick, let's get started by a bit of a background. Tell us a bit about what you're currently doing and how you ended up doing the role that you do now, and perhaps a little bit about how you got there.
So I came from the background of bodybuilding, Alex. I was a competitive bodybuilder when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and competed in a number of local bodybuilding shows in my area, which is Long Island, New York, where I was raised. And that was in college and a little bit after college. And after college, for me, from a professional standpoint, I moved on to law school and then graduated law school and became a lawyer. And so I had these two separate careers. I had a career in my professional life, which was as a law student and then as an assistant district attorney, prosecuting criminal cases here in New York. And separate and apart from that was my avocation, which was what interested me outside of my career, and that was health and fitness. I was a personal trainer. I ran a personal training business for a while. I loved the issues and areas of nutrition and muscle building. And so health and fitness were part of my life outside of my work. And it was only after a number of years that those two very separate components of my life merged into one. And that's what I do today.
Yeah, and I read up that you are a certified strength and conditioning coach then as well. Tell us a bit more about
I am.
What inspired you to initially get involved in that route, and then conversely, what inspired you to get into more the law side of things and the legalities?
So the NSCA has a certification, strength and conditioning certification, that goes beyond what the typical personal trainer would need to know. It goes into all sorts of issues of nutrition and biology, and it also covers exercise physiology and exercise movement and performance. And that's something that I was always fascinated with. I love the gym. I love my time in the gym. I love the effects of hard training, and I love coaching others and helping others to burn fat, build muscle, be better. Ultimately, I co-wrote a men's exercise and diet book called Alpha Male Challenge. Came out about 10 years ago, and it's a book for guys typically in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond, who really want to reclaim their best shape. And so the components of diet and exercise is something that fascinates me. But separate from that was my legal career. And I knew when I was in law school, I kind of always knew, just as I entered law school, that if I was going to be a lawyer, I was going to do something that was exciting. I didn't want to be a lawyer reading 500-page contracts for some multinational conglomerate and faces that I'd never see and clients that I'd never meet. I wanted to do something that was interesting and exciting. And if you, as I've always said to people, if you watch television, they really don't make TV shows about bankruptcy lawyers or mergers and acquisitions lawyers.
No.
They make TV shows about typically criminal lawyers and what it's like in the criminal justice field. And so when I finished law school, I went directly into a prosecutor's office and started prosecuting the bad guys and putting the bad guys in jail for all sorts of crimes, from low misdemeanors to the most serious felonies, robberies, sexual assaults, serious narcotics trafficking cases, burglaries, home invasions, even the most serious cases. And so I did that for 5 years, and there really is no better training ground to be a trial lawyer, in my opinion, than being the prosecutor in a district prosecuting criminal cases. You really learn the ins and outs. You're in court every day. You know how to try a case. You know how to do a hearing. You learn evidentiary rules, and you're a better criminal defense lawyer for having been sort of played for that other team for that period of time. And so I did that, and then ultimately I went into private practice as a criminal defense lawyer initially, and my initial caseload was pretty much in the same area. It was now switching hats and defending people accused of drunk driving or driving without a license or having drugs or selling drugs or committing robberies or accused of committing sexual assaults or even homicides. So I handled all sorts of serious cases, most of them in Manhattan, in New York City, which for me was very cool, because if you're going to be a lawyer handling serious criminal cases anywhere in the world, that was my choice of where I'd want to do it. And so I did that for a number of years. And then, interestingly, I went into private practice, Alex, in 1990.
Right.
And 1990 was a significant year for the world of bodybuilding, because that was the year that Congress in the United States decided that anabolic steroids, something that had become widespread, particularly at high levels of elite bodybuilding and powerlifting, would now be treated as a controlled substance, that steroids would be classified in the same law that covered narcotics like cocaine and heroin. And so in 1991 in the United States, that law went into effect. And up until then, steroids really were prescription drugs, but some of them were prescription drugs. Others were sort of these kind of, loopholed, unapproved drugs that some bodybuilders back then didn't really think of as any more than super vitamins, you know. And so suddenly in 1990, everything changed, and now the mere possession of a single tablet of an anabolic steroid became a controlled substance violation and a crime under federal law. And almost every state followed suit, and so state laws also added anabolic steroids to the Controlled Substances Acts of all of those different states. And so suddenly bodybuilders started getting arrested for selling steroids or even for possessing steroids. And there really were very few lawyers who understood the bodybuilding community, who had been part of the bodybuilding community, who understood why bodybuilders might be using steroids, what the effects were. The media didn't do a lot back in those days to educate the public about steroids. A lot of it was just inflammatory nonsense. And so I started getting more and more calls from bodybuilders who were jammed up in one way or another, or who just had questions about anabolic steroids and the law and what the law said about these things. And so ultimately I created a website at steroidlaw.com, and that website became a bridge between two undereducated places, the place in the courts where lawyers and judges and prosecutors and police and law enforcement personnel were trying to understand how these substances were being used or abused, and on the other hand, the land of the gym, where bodybuilders were trying to understand what the law now said about what they were doing. And so steroidlaw.com became a very active site over time, and I was then asked to write a column in a bodybuilding magazine, which I do to this day. And the editor at the time suggested that I write a book, and I did write a book called Legal Muscle, which was an examination of anabolic steroids in America, and American law and culture and politics and sports and medicine. And so that book became kind of a Bible for a lot of the folks who were trying to understand a more objective review and view of anabolic steroids. And so my practice exploded, both in the areas of criminal defense, in anabolic steroid cases, and growth hormone cases, in cases involving all sorts of different muscle building or anabolic type substances, and then ultimately even went into the dietary supplement field, particularly in sports nutrition, and then from sports nutrition into overall natural products. And so now my practice is essentially where bodybuilding meets the law, and where health and fitness intersect with criminal or regulatory legal issues. And so I represent, and my firm represents, sports nutrition companies, people in the vitamin and supplement field, making sure that their products comply with the FDA regulations and with all applicable laws here in the United States. And I also still do a lot of defense of bodybuilders on the various types of criminal actions that they get jammed up in. And for me, as sort of the bodybuilder lawyer who enjoys being a lawyer, but also enjoys being a bodybuilder, for me to have been able to, not through any great plan of mine, but really by good timing, by following my instincts, by allowing myself to go down a path that I don't think any other lawyer has ever been down. I don't think there's any other lawyer in the world who really does what I do. I've found a place that I love doing what I do, and I'm able to help clients in a way very often that I think no other lawyer really would be able to help them with in the same way. And so for me, I get up in the morning. I love coming to work. Sunday night, I'm excited about Monday morning and getting back to the office. I travel a lot. I've had cases all over the country, and I've lectured on vitamin laws and supplement laws and steroid laws all over the world. I had a lecture I gave last year in Guangzhou, China. A few years before, I was in Bangkok, Thailand. I've gotten to meet incredible people through my bodybuilding legal, area. I've spent some time with Governor Schwarzenegger through bodybuilding, which is for me as I mean, my God, as a kid who grew up with the bodybuilding magazines. I still remember being in high school and riding the bus with a copy of Muscle Builder and Power, which was the Weider magazine's name at the time, and seeing Mike Mentzer on the cover, or seeing Franco Columbu or Frank Zane or Arnold on the cover, and reading those magazines from cover to cover. For me to now have spent the day with Arnold in his office once talking about bodybuilding with the IFBB, and I do represent the pro league bodybuilding as a sport on some legal issues that they encounter. And so for me to have done that is amazing. A few years ago, Sylvester Stallone had a sports nutrition company and a product, and I was grateful that my firm was asked to do the legal work for the regulatory side of his business, for InStone Nutrition back in the day. So for me, it's just been an amazing ride. I'm very blessed and grateful that I've been able to do what I do, and I want to keep doing it for as long as I can.
Yeah, absolutely, Rick. And it sounds like you've found yourself in a unique position to be able to help people on both sides of the from the bodybuilding perspective, and then also having the authority and the knowledge base to be able to defend people in the legal realms as well, which is, like you said, it's quite bespoke. I don't think I've, again, not that I'm big in that space, but known about anyone who is doing a bit of both. And then through that, you're able to connect with these, amazing people that you're passionate about, helping people create a better awareness and a positive impact. And I can relate, because even though it wasn't my era, I do have a picture as we speak right now of Frank Zane, one of his poses next to us. So he's a bit of a hero passed down from my dad, who always looked up to him. So it would have been great to meet Arnold, I'm sure, and a few of those like-minded characters, because they definitely were. Because I think that was the era which, created bodybuilding or put it on the map in a big way. And a lot of people, we know those names, especially people in the industry. Now, going back to what you do from a legal sense, what are some of the main challenges you face when defending bodybuilders, in that industry, or when someone comes to you with a case or an accusation? What are some of the main, processes and protocols that you've got to go through to get people?
It depends. I mean, people come to me with so many different types of bodybuilding or in some cases steroid related issues. A lot of the folks that I come across are people who are charged with either the possessing steroids or with selling them. For the people who are charged just with possession, there was a period of time, I guess, way back in the day when there would be a fairly easy way of importing finished steroids into the country, and most of them would escape the review of the authorities at the ports of entry. And so it was fairly easy for people, a couple decades ago, who to just import 1,000 tabs of Anabol from Thailand, methandrostenolone from Thailand, or from some 10 cc vials of Deca or Test from anywhere overseas. I think after 9/11, the security here in the United States got a lot tougher, and so importation of finished product became progressively more difficult and ultimately led to a switch in supply from finished products to raw powders. And so now we see raw powders as the predominant form of imported anabolic steroids here in the United States. And so we have then the powders being made into esterified liquids for injection or into tablets or pills for oral consumption by underground labs here in the United States. Mm-hmm. When individuals obtain steroids, the reality is most folks using steroids use them in a way that's different than the traditional narcotics users would. If you're a crackhead, typically you go out, you get some crack, you come home, you smoke it, you get high. When you want more crack, you go out and get some more. Mm-hmm. And so you have a much more frequent acquisition pattern. Steroid users don't follow that at all. Steroid users tend to be pack rats. And so typically somebody who wants to do a cycle of steroids will acquire the steroids necessary for the entire duration of that cycle. So if that cycle's product is intercepted by law enforcement, it could seem like a lot to law enforcement, and it could seem like enough that this can't be for personal use. This must be a dealer. And so I've seen one of the problems that I encountered very, very often in the steroid user charged with a crime capacity would be the user who's accused of being a dealer based only on the number of pills, for example, that he is in the process of acquiring. Mm-hmm. So I've seen people charged as dealers because, for example, they imported 500 tablets of low potency of, let's say, a 5 milligram tablet of steroids from overseas. And the reality is this is just what this guy was going to be using on and off for a period of cycles. And so educating the courts, educating the prosecutors, being able to show that the usage patterns of bodybuilders are consistent with this person being a user and not a dealer is one of the hurdles that I face, and I've been very successful in making that point based on my experience and my understanding of, I present literature and documentation that backs it up. With steroid traffickers, lately I've been dealing with traffickers who are in a much higher volume. So it might be somebody who is importing kilos of raw powder and ultimately is the subject of a search warrant where many kilos of raw powder, equipment, lab equipment, some finished products, labels are all acquired. And sometimes the folks who are charged in that case can be facing some prison time. And my goal is to either avoid or to minimize prison time. Here in the United States, whether somebody goes to prison on a steroid case is dependent on a number of factors. Perhaps most importantly, the volume of steroids that they're involved with. The higher the volume, the higher the prison exposure, and the other factor is prior record. Most of my clients have no prior criminal record, but those who do can face more time. I had a case in Boston not too long ago that was a person who had already served a 5-year sentence on a drug case, and then was involved in a very, very high volume of steroids, compounded with a trademark issue in that the steroids were named the same name as a legitimate pharmaceutical company, which kind of morphed the case from a simple steroid case into a trademark case. I wrote about that. It was the Musclehead 320 case, and I wrote about that in the magazine. I think it's online in various places on Muscular Development Magazine for one, and that's really an amazing story of kind of a rags to riches to rags kind of tale of how Instagram was used as sort of the vehicle to set up a fairly substantial steroid trafficking program, and kind of combining it with this fictional character. Instagram, social media in general is now kind of a place where people can pretend to be other than what they are. Everybody curates what they show. They show the best parts of their life or aggrandize aspects of their life in a way that's not always accurate and sometimes is completely far removed from who they are as a person. And in that case, the guy charged, my client, had created this alter ego on his Instagram page, which really propelled sales. And so it was that alter ego that both, was his great rise and brought in great revenues, but also, the revenues and his success ultimately led to his downfall. So hopefully it'll be a story. I know they're doing a story in a local magazine up in Boston soon, and I've been actually talking to some folks in Los Angeles about maybe trying to get some sort of a screenplay based on it, because it really is an amazing story.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it's funny you mentioned that because there are there's probably quite a lot of characters doing that. I've noticed even on Facebook as well as Instagram, the fake profiles, if you like, of people or so-called bodybuilders who are distributing these products, and you can usually tell if this person is not real, but again, there's obviously a large percentage of people who can't, and that sort of just resonated with me a little bit there, because I have seen a couple of those things, especially over the past years. It's been a bit of a rise, so I can relate in that respect, Rick. In terms of repercussions, what are the I guess the word I'm trying to find is escaping me at the moment, but when someone is found in possession versus distributing, what are the actions of the court versus those two protocols for someone who is using performance enhancing drugs versus someone who's selling and distributing them and using that as a business medium to make money?
Right. So I think the probability of prison in almost any jurisdiction in the United States, and I've been in most of them, is much higher if it's a trafficking distribution case than if it is a possession case. Here in the United States, I think we went probably too far in criminalizing and imprisoning people. We have more people imprisoned here in the United States than virtually anywhere else in the world, and many of them are for nonviolent drug cases. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of resulted after the crack epidemic in the 80s, and we went crazy with some of our laws, and now I think we're scaling that back and trying to find alternatives to prison, particularly for possession of drugs. And so even though steroids are very different than most of the recreational drugs that we typically think of or see in the criminal justice system, it's also one of the beneficiaries of this sort of change of policy. And for mere possession in many jurisdictions, the chances of prison or jail time is fairly low. With trafficking, it really is much more of a likely scenario that prosecutors will be thinking in terms of prison or jail for folks who particularly are high-level traffickers. And so my work is to try to find ways to minimize that probability or avoid it entirely. And then, of course, separate and apart from the criminal justice system, there's a whole nother problem with steroids if you're in a place where you might be drug tested. So in a job or employment scenario where you're subject to drug screenings, or if you're an athlete who competes in a sport and you're drug tested as part of your athletic regimen, that's a whole separate problem. And that's another problem that people come to me with, and I've helped a lot of people who've been charged with violating the rules of sport by giving a urine sample that has a banned substance in it. Mm-hmm. And so I've worked with college athletes who've been accused of doping here in the United States and professional athletes as well. A few years ago, I was called to work on a case where the number one ranked middleweight boxer in the world, a guy named Sam Solomon. You may know that name. Mm-hmm. Sam's an Australian. Yeah, former kickboxer, Australian boxer. And Sam fought a German champion by the name of Felix Sturm in Dusseldorf, Germany. And then Sam tested positive after the fight for a stimulant called methylphenephrine or oxyliphrine. And Sam swore to me and swore to everyone that he hadn't purposely taken any kind of stimulant, or that certainly he hadn't taken oxyliphrine. And they tried to take away his purse and to take away his ranking, which would have destroyed his entire career, particularly at that time in his career. And he was going closer toward the end of his career than being at the very start of his career. And so I was brought in to try to undo that damage for Sam. And I do believe, and I think we pretty much established, that Sam's positive was as a result of a dietary supplement product that he bought in a health food store in Australia and had taken, and had even asked the manager of the health food store whether he, as a drug-tested athlete, could take that product, and the manager told him he could. And he even asked the manager to call on the phone the manufacturer of the product, and I was able to even get a phone record showing that at the time Sam was in the store, the manager called the manufacturer of the product, who also said that this wouldn't be a problem. And there are issues surrounding dietary supplement products that may contain substances that are not on the label, and that athletes need to be aware of. But ultimately, I was able to be part of a team that showed that Sam had not knowingly taken anything, and I was able to keep his ranking where it was without him falling down in the ranks. And he went on to beat Felix Sturm in a rematch without any sort of negative issues or any positive drug test, and then went on in his next fight to $1 million purse. And so I was very, very happy that I was able to help Sam that way. A really good guy. One of your Australian mates had a very similar accent to yours, Alex. We went to lunch here in New York City at a well-known boxers cafe here that is well known for as a boxer hangout. And then Sam ultimately flew me out to one of his fights out on the West Coast in Tacoma, Washington, as his guest, and it was very nice, and it just shows how I can help people. And I have clients that are very, very grateful for my services, and that makes me very happy.
For sure. It's very satisfying, I think, again, to coin the term to bring justice. And to unearth the truth, because a lot of the time, and I'm sure you've seen it, and there's a lot of colleagues in your industry where I imagine it will be very frustrating at times when you can't defend, or that something's gone down and it's not quite right, and you fight, and sometimes it takes months and even years in a lot of cases
Yes.
to bring the truth. But I
Yeah.
think, again, to kind of help someone, not only just someone who is innocent, and someone who's
Right.
been wronged from something that they've not done, but also someone in the industry in terms of health and fitness that could, again, made or broke his career, is very very
Yes.
satisfying indeed. It's good that you got that backing and
Yes. It's funny you say that, because most people ask criminal defense lawyers, how do you defend guilty people? That's the common question that a lot of lay people ask, and the reality is that's the easy part of the job, because statistically, most people charged with a criminal offense are guilty, if not of the crime, then at least of something. Most are. And if the day ever comes where most people are innocent and accused of crimes, that's probably where we have to really seriously rethink our government.
Yeah.
But there are innocent people who do get charged, and representing innocent people is the hardest part of what a criminal defense lawyer does, because the system is really designed here in the United States. It's designed to funnel people from arraignment and the beginning of a case to a guilty plea and a sentence. That's the standard way that a criminal case proceeds. And when a criminal defense lawyer gets an innocent client, you can't go that way. There is no guilty plea. There is no sentence in the case that you're willing to accept as a negotiated deal. You've got to fight. And the stakes are high, and the pressure is high, and the stress is high. There's very few things in life that can be as onerous and burdensome for a criminal defense lawyer than to have an innocent client whose fate is in your hands. And I'll give you an example. I had a woman who reached out to me a number of years ago from a southwestern state in the United States, and she called me up and she said, "Rick, I need your help." And I said, "Of course. What can I do to help you?" She said, "Well, I'm charged with a sale of a single vial of testosterone to an undercover snitch who was working off his own case, and they're looking to prosecute me for it, and they're saying that if I don't plead guilty, they're going to give me 10 years in prison. I've never been in trouble before, but I did not sell this. I'm innocent. This didn't happen. I never sold him any testosterone at all." And so I called up the prosecutor, and the prosecutor said, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about. This is an open and shut case." She had a phone call with our confidential informant, who cold called her, knowing that she owns a gym in her neighborhood in this state, in a small little town. And he asked her about personal training, and she does personal training at the gym. And he asked her about diet, and she said, "Well, if you come in tomorrow, I'll sign you up, and I'll give you a diet, and I'll start training you." And then he asked her about steroids, and she said, "Well, if you come in tomorrow, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take a vial of testosterone, and I will stick it into a bottle of multivitamins, and I will sell you that combination, the steroid vial inside the bottle of vitamins, for $100 if you come into the gym tomorrow." So he called up, this undercover snitch called up the agent or detective that he was working off his case with, cooperating with, and he told the detective of this conversation. So the next morning, he met with the detective, and the detective gave him $100 and put a recording device on him and sent him into the gym to have a conversation with the client. And he went in there, and they had a conversation, and it was recorded. And he then came out of the gym and he took his car, drove his car back to where the detective was, and said to the detective, here's this bottle of vitamins. And he handed it to the detective, and the detective unscrewed the top and looked inside, and guess what's inside?
Nothing.
No, a vial of testosterone. It's there. It was there, just like he said it would be. And so the detective took that evidence, and a week or two later, they conducted a search warrant at her house, and they found steroids in her house, in the bedroom. Her husband was a power lifter, but they found steroids that were actually on his side of the bedroom and his nightstand, but there were steroids there. And so the prosecutor said to me, here in our state, we have a 3 strikes and you're out rule. Strike one was that she had a drug-related conversation on the phone the day before. Strike two was she gave this testosterone in a bottle of vitamins for $100. And strike three was a couple weeks later, we got these steroids from her house. With that, strike one, strike two, strike three, she's looking at 10 years in prison. But I'll tell you what we're going to do. If she pleads guilty to a felony, I'll let her have probation. But if she doesn't plead guilty, she's going to trial. I'm withdrawing that offer, and she's going to get 10 years in prison if she is convicted.
Wow.
So it's a pretty serious situation.
It is.
So
it's shaping up to be an interesting.
It's no joke. So I told her this, and her response to me was, well, they're going to have to put me in prison for 10 years because I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do. So I flew out to that state for the purposes of having a deposition of the snitch, of this confidential informant. And the day that I showed up to depose him, and in this particular state you're allowed to do depositions before trial. In most states in the United States, you can't do that of the government's or people's witnesses, states' witnesses. Mm-hmm. And the day that I show up, the prosecutor says to me, I got bad news for you. He's not available. The confidential informant had some family issues, so he's not available. Now, I'm in New York, and I've flown 4 or 5 hours. I said, I can't come fly back and forth this frequently. Let's do this in a couple of months. He said, no, the offer is withdrawn in a week. So unless you're willing to fly back here within a week and do this deposition, the probation officer is off. The probation office offer is off the table, and it won't come back. So now I had to make a decision of, do I forget about that and come back for a deposition later, even though if it doesn't go well, I can't get the probation offer back, or do I proceed differently? And he says, well, I could get the guy on the phone if you want to depose him by phone. And so that's actually what I did, probably the only time I've ever done it in my career. I don't know if any lawyer's ever deposed somebody by phone because you can't see him and you can't really see what his reactions are. It's not good, but I felt like I had no choice. And I knew that I had something good, and that is that I had listened to the tape recording of their transaction. And I heard how he asked about the diet and about the training. And at one point he did say, well, what about steroids? And she said, well, I'm a competitive bodybuilder myself, but I don't recommend steroids to starters. It's not really something I recommend. Then he says, well, what about those vitamins we talked about on the phone yesterday? And she said, oh, yeah, okay, let me get them for you. And you hear, some rustling around and him giving her some money. And then, you hear him say, well, I have to go to the bathroom. Do you mind if I use it? Well, he said it was $100. And I asked him, well, in my deposition when I talked to him on the phone, did you give her $100? He said, yes. I said, okay. And this was for the combination of the drugs and the vitamins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, she didn't ring it up on the cash register, right? Well, no, because you wouldn't ring up a cash register receipt for a drug transaction. That would be crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yes, of course not.
So.
Yeah, she just pocketed the money, right? Yes. What he didn't know was that I had a cash register receipt for $20, time coded to the exact time of this transaction. Not $100, but $20. What he also didn't realize was that when he went into the bathroom, the tape, the recording device, was still running. And you hear him go into the bathroom, you hear him close the door, you hear him take his keys and put them on the porcelain of the sink. You hear him rustling around with what sounds like cellophane wrapping. And then you hear the sound of the tablets hitting the bowl as he scoops out some of the vitamin tablets to insert the vial into the bottle so he can present it to the cop. And I asked him, well, wait a minute. When you got this bottle of vitamins with what you say are the steroids inside, you brought it directly to the police officer, didn't you? You didn't take it anywhere else. Well, I had to go to the bathroom. Wait a minute. You had to go to the bathroom so urgently that you couldn't wait just a few minutes to give this evidence, this crucial evidence, what you're claiming are the drugs, to give that evidence to the police officer? No, I had to go so bad. I go, number one or number two? He goes, number one. Okay, so you had to urinate so badly that you couldn't wait to bring it to the officer. You had to go right then, right there in the bathroom inside the gym. Yes. I said, well, man, when you went to the bathroom, it must have been amazing. I mean, you must have felt great. He goes, oh, yes, I had to go, because you had to go so badly. Yes, I had to go so badly. What he didn't realize is that the tape was running. You heard all the things I described, but you didn't hear one thing. Want to take a guess?
Urination.
One drop of urine. One drop hitting that bowl. And when I confronted him with that, he said, well, I don't like the way this conversation is going. I said, I didn't think you would because there's a name for it. He said, what's that? I said, it's called perjury. It's what you've just done. He's like, well, I want my lawyer. I won't talk to you anymore. And he just hangs up the phone. The prosecutor's face was as white. The prosecutor's face was as white as a sheet. He says to me, well, would you would you take a misdemeanor? I said, a misdemeanor? No. I tell you how this is going to go. You're going to drop all of the charges against this woman for what has gone on in this case, and I'm going to try to convince her not to sue you, the police department, and the entire court system here for this atrocity of what you've just done. And he looked at me and said, okay, I could live with that. And so that was the end of that case. And luckily the tape, the recording device was running, because I could see how, as a competitive bodybuilder, she certainly looked like somebody who was into hardcore bodybuilding. And I think that he picked her out as a victim to frame, literally to frame, for a crime that never happened, that he made appear as if it happened when it never happened, because she was low-hanging fruit. She was one of the few serious bodybuilders in that small town, and so in front of a jury, he probably figured, well, they're not going to believe her. They're going to look at her and they're going to say, yeah, she looks like she might be using steroids. She looks like she might have sold steroids. And that's a scary thing.
Yeah.
That's a scary thing, and I'm grateful, and she's one of my grateful clients, and I keep in touch with her to this day. She's a great person, and I'm so happy and fulfilled that my skills and my knowledge were able to help her in a way that that really saved an innocent person from the jaws of the criminal justice system.
Yeah. And like you said, it can, I mean, I'm sure there's many stories like that as well, Rick, where, sometimes it doesn't go that way and people get, prosecuted and accused and then convicted of a crime that they didn't do, all because, like you said, it doesn't line up. And the way you described it at the start, you go, well, it sounds, like she may have committed the crime. But as I guess the maxim goes, there's always two sides to a story. And sometimes, from a third-party perspective with experience like yourself, asking those questions, thinking about it, and then going through those steps, and you go, well, hang on a minute, this doesn't add up. And then obviously, you get someone in the corner, you ask them a few legitimate questions, and you go, no, this is not right. So, I mean, this is better than an episode of Suits. This is just the real deal.
This is real life. Yeah. Someday I'll have to put a book together. I wrote Legal Muscle. I wrote Alpha Male Challenge. I think someday I'll do my autobiography and call it My Life on Steroids. So
hey, that's a good and what a catchy slogan to get people in on that. No, you're a great storyteller, Rick. The way you articulate it, and you definitely had me on the edge of my seat. Very, very interesting.
Thanks, man. Trial lawyers are storytellers. I just finished teaching. I teach Trial Academy 2, sometimes 3 times a year to law students or young lawyers who want to know how to try a case, how to fight for a client in a courtroom. And it really is more than anything else storytelling. It is finding a way to tell a story. If you're a criminal defense lawyer, your story is of a case that's fraught with reasonable doubt or of an innocent person. And if you're a prosecutor, you're telling a story of guilt. But telling that story is the way that cases are won, and not telling a story is the way the cases are lost.
For sure. I can definitely see that when I have a couple of friends who have studying and then now work in the industry, not quite in the same sectors as you, but to be a very good lawyer in any sense of the word, you have to be an absolutely superb communicator. And you need many skills. I mean, you almost need to be a bit of a psychologist. That you mentioned it before. If you're in person with someone, being able to read somebody, knowing when someone's telling you fibs and lies, but then also being able to articulate the thoughts, the ideas, the literature, the evidence, get that across in a way to, whatever party is needed to get the desired result. So definitely a skill that is paramount for success. In terms of to springboard off that question, Rick, I wanted to ask one from the perspective, because I think a lot of listeners will be sort of hanging on this one. What are some of the things you can do to mitigate the risk for athletes, especially in the strength-based and the physique community, athletes who are competing? Apart from total elimination, now I'm not someone who takes a lot of supplements. I keep them on the minimum, really based on I like to get a lot of my things from food, and I know that they're there to fill the gaps rather than, as some people use them as the whole and they rely on them. And again, you've got a lot of these big brands out there. You got Optimum Nutrition, you got Hawley's, you got Phytosport, etc. And now you've got this myriad of, you got pre-workouts, you got this supplement, mate, you do this, and you got a supplement for everything. And, a lot of, especially the younger audience, they can fall prey to that marketing, and sometimes they're taking things that they don't need to. And I know back in New Zealand, where I studied and grew up, there was a couple of companies which got some repercussions because they were using, again, illicit substances, and there was a few sort of, hearsay, this say, and all that and the other. But it does happen a lot. So I guess what are some key points and takeaways for people who are listening that perhaps take a variety of supplementation and they do compete, or they want to compete at a high level? What can they do that's in their best interest? I know this is something that you talked about on Stronger by Science, which is something that I took a lot away from when you were talking about what you can do for your own well-being and peace of mind, just in case, something does come back in a negative way.
Right. Well, most athletic federations will warn all the athletes who are subject to drug testing that they take supplements at their own risk. And it's kind of unfortunate that the supplements that would benefit us, would make us healthier, are something that taking them is discouraged by the athletic federations because of these issues of potential false positives or positives that come out of these inadvertent positives that come out of these products. And so every athlete does need to recognize that if you're a drug-tested athlete, you are taking supplements at your own risk. And so there's always going to be some risk. There's issues of potential cross-contamination, where if machinery isn't cleaned properly between one run and another, there could be vestigial amounts of material from the previous run, and so you can find small amounts of things that potentially may be problematic in a dietary supplement product. I think that was far more common a few years back when the pro-hormone industry was in full swing, and so you had these steroidal compounds that were being manufactured for use in dietary supplements, and then they'd make a different type of non-pro-hormone product on the same machinery after that, and so you had a higher probability that there might be some steroidal material. That doesn't happen so much anymore, so I think the potential for a positive for a steroidal type thing in a dietary supplement product is much, much, much less than what it was. But the risk is always there. So the ways you can minimize that risk is there have been companies now that are sensitive to the potential of drug-tested athletes testing positive, and so they are getting third-party certification of their products by third-party organizations that test for banned substances. And there's at least 3 of them that I know of. Each one is a little bit different in the ways that they do it, but all of them test for banned substances in sports nutrition products, so that there's a certification on the label of the product basically saying, look, we've tested this product, we do batch testing of this product, and we look for the sorts of substances that would be a problem for you, and we're putting our certification on this product that it's okay. And so I think that's one way. Looking for those third-party certifications is one way to greatly minimize your risk. And then another way would be that if you are a drug-tested athlete and you're not taking intentionally taking any kind of banned substance, one thing to do would be to save small amounts of the products that you use, and so what you might call retained samples, so to speak, so that when you finish that protein powder jug, or you finish the bottle of creatine that you've taken, that you don't use all of it, that you leave a little of it in the bottle and you tuck it away and you save it. And you buy a new bottle and you start using a new bottle, and you tuck it away for long enough that, for a long enough period of time that it would no longer be an issue. And if the following month you're drug tested and you test positive, well, you can go to a lawyer like me, and you can bring all of your retained samples, and we can send them out to a third-party lab for testing, and we can see if one of them is the source of your positive. And that puts us in a greatly enhanced position to be able to fight the positive.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of and I'm sure, again, in your realm, you've come in contact a lot of tainted supplements. I think you used an example of where, and this was unfortunate, there was an own staff member going in, spiking the product he was buying, and then saying, "Oh, hang on a minute, like I wasn't taking the illegal substances. The illegal substance was in the product, but he was actually spiking his own product." Is that right? Does that happen?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, there are athletes who are unscrupulous and who use substances that they know are banned, and they intentionally do it. They're essentially knowingly doping, and that they are taking some of their doping material and sprinkling it into a product as a way of, if caught, showing or trying to use this dog ate my homework excuse of showing, hey, look, it's in my product, but they're the one that put it there.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I have seen and actually represented a client a few years back on the opposite side of that equation. The client was the owner of a brand of dietary supplements that had some fat-burning stimulant type products on the market, and the owner of the company, after hours in the facility, was going in and spiking the products with clenbuterol, a beta-2 agonist, a bronchodilator, but a stimulant, and illegal here in the United States, and this was in the United States. So he was putting clen in his fat burner products and then bottling up, packing them up, and selling them. And so obviously people were using these products thinking, wow, look at my abs, I'm losing weight. This is where, man, this stuff's good. And little did they know that they were using a drug-spiked product that would cause a positive for them if they were drug tested. And so he ultimately came to me when he was arrested for that. And, it was a federal criminal case for doing that. So, that the spiking issue can happen on either side. I have to tell you, though, Alex, that I think that it's rare. I have not seen that happen in the dietary supplement industry. I think that here in the United States, most of the dietary supplement manufacturers and brands are not doing anything like that. That there are some bad apples, but there are far more folks who are scrupulous, and I would have to hope that that most of the athletes are not sprinkling the products. There are ways, and I've talked to a number of athletes who have used different methods of trying to pass the tests in drug testing, sometimes by using somebody else's urine in some sort of way of concealing a stash of urine that to make it appear as if it's coming out of your body. Seems like a lot of work, but these things sometimes are used.
They are. It always amazes me the lengths that people will go and have gone to avoid, getting caught or taking illegal substances, and it does make you wonder sometimes. It was something that always interested me in my studies when we were talking about the things that athletes are doing, can do, how it's policed, what has gone on, and they always use some pretty prime examples. And yeah, it is a bit of a shame, but it is good to know as well that a lot of companies, in your experience, are doing what is right and what is ethical for the most part. As you said, you'll never get 100% compliance. That's just the way it is, and that's why people like yourself exist, etc. Just because I know we're getting close to time, but one question before my little series of finisher questions, if you like, is what are, in your opinion, some of the most reputable companies or well-recognized brands? Because a lot of people, as I said before, I rattled off some of the bigger names. In your opinion, who do you think are the kind of leaders in the forefront of policing and a qualitative approach in their products, to name a few brands, if you could, Rick?
Yeah, it's hard to say, and one of the reasons why I try to avoid ever giving particular brands is, I mean, obviously I represent a number of brands, and so I wouldn't want to be promoting non-clients' products. And on the other hand, you know, I would appear to be biased if I just started naming my own clients' brands. You know, I can tell you that what I do is, in the supplement industry, pretty much half of what my firm does is tries to keep people out of trouble, and the other half is getting them out of trouble when they're in trouble. If we've got the client and we're keeping him out of trouble, he's typically going to stay out of trouble. And it's the clients who either didn't have lawyers or had other lawyers or didn't care about the law and then get in trouble, they come to me. I can tell you that it costs a lot more money if you come to me and you're in trouble than if you come to me before you're in trouble and you say, how do I stay out of trouble? It's not all that expensive to stay out of trouble. It's a matter of us looking at your labels to make sure that your labels comply, that your claims are substantiated, that they're legal claims, that you're in compliance with the FTC, with the FDA, that your ingredients are in compliance with the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. It's a matter of looking at these things, that you're not infringing somebody else's trademark, that you are protecting your own trademark. These are all basic things that we do as a law firm, and it's not expensive. It's when the FDA has come into your facility and executed a search warrant because they think that what you're selling is an unapproved drug, or that the claims you're making has turned the product into a drug, that it gets expensive, because litigation is expensive. So I tell everybody in the industry, you know, come to me before you have a problem, and we can walk you through so that there won't be a problem. And be one of those reputable brands. Be a brand that cares about your consumers and that wants people to have good quality products. And you know, don't be one of the people who comes to me after you've been selling something that you shouldn't have been selling, or you've been making claims that have no basis in fact, and you had no reason to be making in the first place. Because while I'm good at helping and I fight hard for every client, that's what I do. You know, criminal defense lawyers are you know, basically gladiators. We go into the ring and we do battle in the arena for you, but that will be much more expensive and more stressful for you than if you just do it right from the beginning.
Yeah, makes sense. Prevention is always better than cure.
You know, and I love what I do. Like I said before, I'm a guy who enjoys challenging myself, who enjoys challenges. I've done some fun stuff a few years ago outside of sort of both bodybuilding and the legal capacity. I decided that I was a little skittish about heights when I reached a certain age, and I had never had an issue with heights earlier. And I decided that the way to overcome that would be to do a skydive at 13,000 feet. And so I signed up for that, and it was such an amazing experience that I actually signed up for a few more and actually got my my skydiver's license, my USPA skydiver's license here in the United States. You know, and because it was challenging, and I like the idea of pushing myself outside my comfort zone. And that also was a large part of what that book, Alpha Male Challenge, although it was a diet and exercise book in form, its message overall was to in order to be your best self, you need to push yourself outside your comfort zone. And that's how we grow, and that's how we excel.
For sure, and you've kind of almost took the words out of my mouth there, Rick. That was one of my last questions that I usually ask my guests is, and you might have a different one, and I'll sort of circle back to that in a second. But before we do, I usually ask a couple of rapid fire questions just before that final one, which is just a bit playful. It's a little bit more about you, and it's fun to sum up the podcast, and it sort of enthralls a bit of a human element. So. Again, some really quick questions, Rick, and whatever comes to mind first. If you could wake up anywhere in the world tomorrow, where would it be and why?
If I could wake up anywhere in the world, right now, one of the bucket list, I'd love to do Iceland. I've been all over the world. I've never seen the Northern Lights. When I've flown to Asia, I've flown over the North Pole. I've seen the sun on the horizon, which is an amazing thing. But right now, I would love to see the Aurora Borealis in Iceland.
Sure. That would be beautiful. One on my to-do list as well. I've heard great things. And secondarily, if you could choose a superpower, apart from the one that you've already got, defending people and bringing justice, I'd say that's a superpower in itself. What would it be?
Many years ago, I had a dream. It was woke up in the morning in the middle of this dream, and it was really weird. I was in my backyard when I was a kid, and I was standing in the backyard, and I was able to, by moving my arms, I was able to levitate off the ground a little bit. And the more I started to do that, kind of the better I got at it, and I started, being able to bounce up higher and higher. And then ultimately, I was able to actually begin flying over my backyard, and then little by little over the neighborhood. And I was looking down at my friends' houses and at the local ball field, and I had this incredible, exhilarating feeling of flying. So chalk me up, give me the cape, give me the blue tights, and let's give me the ability to fly.
There you go. I think it's a popular one. I think the closest you can get is the skydive to experience that.
Exactly. Yep, and that I have.
Fantastic. And my final rapid fire question before the last more serious question is: what is your favorite food and drink? Like, if you could only have one meal for the rest of your life, what would it be? What would it look like?
One meal. I don't know if I could do it every day for the rest of my life, but my favorite right now is poke.
Oh, the poke bowls?
The poke bowls, yeah. And the first time I had it was about 3 years ago on the Venice boardwalk. And whenever I got out, have you ever been to Los Angeles, Alex?
I have, actually. Yeah, I spent a little bit of time there in between migrating to New Zealand, but I didn't really spend too long. I was LA, San Diego, and a little bit of time in Anaheim. So I do want to come back, and now I'm an older adult, and explore it and enjoy it a little bit more.
Did you get to Gold's Gym or Venice Beach?
No, I was only 10 years old at the time, so it was very
okay.
We went to San Diego SeaWorld. We did a little bit of sightseeing, but right. Was very young.
Okay.
So I just remember.
Well, the next time you go, whenever I get out to, and I have a lot of cases sometimes in California, so I get out there, and I usually try to see the Pacific Ocean whenever I'm out there, and I have a little place where I like to get sunglasses down on the boardwalk in Venice Beach, and I usually try to get a workout in at Gold's in Venice, and then eat at the firehouse right nearby. Sometimes I'll see my good friend Chris Bell, who was the director of that movie Bigger, Stronger, Faster that I was in about steroids a few years ago. And I was on the Venice Boardwalk a couple of years ago, and I heard somebody yelling, "Pokey, pokey, pokey." I'm like, what's didn't know what it was at the time, and walked over, and it was a little shop selling, these poke bowls, and I think it was some brown rice and some, pickled ginger and some big chunks of fresh salmon in there, and it was just amazing, and it was healthy, and it was wonderful. So chalk me up for a poke bowl, and one of my one of my favorite alcohol beverages. I like a good bottle of Cabernet. Not a big drinker, but I do enjoy a nice red wine, particularly with a steak. But I also like dark beer. And I was in Ireland 2 years ago, and it's funny. And it seems like in Ireland, Guinness is the big popular beer in Dublin and on the east coast of Ireland, but on the west coast of Ireland, it seems like Murphy's is the dark beer of choice, and they somewhat look down on Guinness. So I like them both. So if I have to choose one or the other, I might go with Murphy's. I think it might be a little smoother.
There you go. You'll have to, if you like that beer, try also Kilkenny is another good one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a New Zealand or an Australia dark beer?
I'm actually from England originally, so
Right.
I'm a worldly child. I spent 10 years in England, 10 years New Zealand, 8 years in Australia. But yeah, a lot of my background is Irish, Scottish, and Italian. And my dad is a big fan of the dark beers, and he loves the Guinness, but the Kilkenny is another dark beer. Have a
Kilkenny.
Google it. Yeah, it's almost. I could almost say it's a little bit darker and even more stodgy than Guinness. Guinness, you can get it, especially when you get it in Ireland, like Murphy's, very thick.
Right.
So it's like a meal, right? But yeah,
right.
If you like those, have a look at Kilkenny. It's usually a popular one.
I will check it out, and it's funny that you say that, Alex, because I am going to be in London next month.
Oh.
So I'll be in London for a conference for about 5 days. So if you have any great recommendations for touring London, I haven't been in London in well over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's one of the places I haven't been lately, and I'm very, very excited about it.
Yeah, London is an amazing place. Just an absolutely multitude of diversity there, and I think one of the heartbeats of the universe. So yeah, if I've not been there for a while myself, and it's on my to-do list, but I can certainly point you in the right direction with some of my friends over there for sure. And
right,
Rick, my last question, a little bit more of a serious note. You kind of touched on it before with the skydiving, but could you identify for us one fear? Or one main fear that you've overcome in your career? What was it, and what did you learn from overcoming it?
Yeah, I think certainly that little fear of heights was something that I overcame through the skydiving. But just sort of more broadly, when we think about bodybuilding, people get into bodybuilding for a variety of different reasons. Some of them do it because they're in high school and they're playing a high school sport, and they want to get stronger for the sport. But I think a lot of people get into bodybuilding because they're trying to overcome. Maybe they were picked on as a kid. Maybe they were heavy as a kid, and so they're trying to reform their bodies. And I also think a lot of people get into bodybuilding because they've gone through some struggles, and maybe it's social anxiety. And I have a lot of clients who are obviously, most of my clients are bodybuilders, and I do see that for a lot of them, whether it was social anxiety or some type of discomfort with their own body. Maybe they felt that they were too skinny, or that they didn't look the way they wanted to look. And so I think for a lot of people, bodybuilding becomes almost like a compensatory way of overcoming some of those insecurities that everybody has in life to one degree or another. And bodybuilding, I think, is a very healthy way of overcoming that. For some people, it's almost like a coping mechanism. My dad passed away when I was 16 years old, and my bodybuilding really began in earnest soon after that. And at the time, I didn't really put any real connection to it. But I think that, as the years passed, I became more aware that it wasn't so much of a coincidence. And I went through a tough time as a teenager. And I think for me, bodybuilding was a way of coping with that, of making myself strong enough to deal with that loss, of making myself, empowering myself enough. And so we kind of metaphorically put that armor on our bodies, physically in our exterior, in order to make ourselves strong enough to have that armor that we need to be able to get through some stuff that sometimes is really hard to get through. And so I think for a lot of people, bodybuilding is a healthy way of dealing with the stresses in life, of overcoming some things that are difficult for us, that hurt us, that make us feel unsafe. And so for me, bodybuilding has just been an amazing way of overcoming any kind of those sort of negative feelings of loss from an early age, and of giving me the tools and the skills to really excel. Bodybuilding teaches discipline. Bodybuilding teaches patience. You're not going to have a 20-inch arm tomorrow if you have a 14-inch arm. It's by putting in the time, not just a day, not just a week, but week after week, month after month, year after year. That's how the progress is made. You have to have the patience for that. You have to have the discipline for that. You have to have the perseverance for that. And if you're in competition, bodybuilding competition for me taught me lessons about preparation, about dedication, about sacrifice. You have to sacrifice, particularly at competition level. You don't go out with all your friends. You don't go partying on Saturday night. No. You're getting ready for a show. You're not going to eat the things that you want. You're not going to have the cheat meals. And these sorts of sacrifices, I think, really are. I remember for one of the shows that I did, I was meticulous about my diet for months leading up to the show. And a couple days before the show, I remember squeezing the skin over my abs between my fingers, and it was so dry and so thin, it felt like cellophane. And that let me know that I was ready for this show. Yeah. And so that kind of, the dedication and discipline that it takes to get there, you can apply in whatever you do in life. For me, I apply it in the courtroom. I apply it in law. I apply it when I help people overcome the legal problems that they have. But whatever it is that you do in life, you can take those skills. And I think as bodybuilders, we have an advantage over virtually anybody else, because most people don't have that discipline. They don't have that willingness to sacrifice, that dedication that comes from the years in the gym, in the trenches, doing what we do as bodybuilders. And so, frankly, I think being a bodybuilder makes you better at whatever else you're going to do in your life.
For sure. And I think there's a lot of people listening that will resonate with that, Rick, and it's something that connects with myself. I specifically like the metaphor you used about it being your armor, because that's something that Frank Zane written about in his book Fabulously Fit Forever, as I read as a younger gentleman. And yeah, it really hits home hard, because I think a lot of people, you're right, they do get into it because of some adversity or some pain. And as we chatted about off camera at the start, just to summarize, it's so much more. Bodybuilding, lifting weights, resistance training is so much more than just lifting weights. And I think you're right. I like the way you interpreted that in a way that it can and does often give you an advantage, because it builds character and discipline that only someone who has stepped on the bodybuilding stage and got truly shredded, or as we call dick skin lean, knows the sacrifice of. So I think that's a beautiful way to sum up this conversation, Rick. And I really do appreciate your time and sharing with us your knowledge and experience. And there's many more things I wanted to go into, but perhaps we'll have to do a round 2 when you're here in Australia.
Anytime, Alex, and let me know if you come here to the States, and be happy to see you when you're here. And thank you so much for having me on the show.
That's absolutely my pleasure, Rick. And just one last thing before we go: if people want to find you and a little bit more about what you do and the good work you're doing, where are the best places to connect and find out about that?
Well, social media is always a great place to start. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Rick Collins ESQ, ESQ for Esquire, so it's Rick Collins ESQ. I also have a Facebook page at Rick Collins Online. You can find me at my website if you're interested in anabolic steroid issues. Steroidlaw.com is a great place to start. If you're interested in dietary supplement issues, Supplement Council, COUNSEL.com has a blog with lots of information about dietary supplement products in the United States. And then last but not least, I have a personal website at rickcollins.com, and you can read a little bit more about me there. But anybody who wants to follow me on social media, I appreciate everybody who does so.
For sure. And all those links, as always, for everyone listening, will be in the description and the show notes below. Rick, thank you once again. I really appreciate your time. Guys, thanks for tuning in to this latest episode of the Raw Knowledge Podcast. And as always, we'll be back next week with another fantastic episode and another talented guest. And as always, in the meantime, stay fearless.